Enterprise is presented by WGBH Boston in co-production with BBC London. With grants from public television stations, the Dun & Bradstreet Corporation, providing business and information services worldwide. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, a breed apart. Charles E. Culpeper Foundation, and the Gates Foundation.
This is really the raw edge of capitalism. If you lose, no one's going to bail you out. It's a very wild market, and it's very choppy, and it's very easy for a lot of people to lose money.
The Ivory Coast depends on the success of this crop, cocoa. It represents 30% of foreign earnings. It's also 30% of the price of chocolate. But between the beans and the bars, there's a market riddled with intrigue and risk. Cocoa has become one of the world's hottest commodities. This week on Enterprise, hot chocolate. January 1983. The drought in West Africa has led to the worst cocoa harvest in the Ivory Coast for years. Cocoa has always been very unpredictable. It's a difficult crop, prone to disease and sensitive to weather. It grows in pods, so the beans inside have to be scooped out and left to ferment. But before the farmer can sell the beans, they must be properly dried.
Monsieur Brucotti, là, où il est? Patron. Mais voyez comment ça, votre cacao est trop humide, mon cher ami.
Mon patron, cacao là, c'est bon, j'ai bien séché.
Ah, mon cher.
Je l'accepte toujours. Voyez-vous aussi.
Voilà.
Comment c'est joli.
Voilà, venez voir les fèves là. Il y a beaucoup de fèves ardoisées, des fèves moisies.
Oh, j'ai bien fermenté pendant 7 jours.
Ben, moi, je ne vais pas tolérer. Vous allez mettre ça au soleil.
Alors, mon contrôleur, c'est ce que je compte pour vivre. Sans ça, vraiment, on n'a plus vivre. C'est mon seul produit que j'ai.
Pour cette dernière fois, je vais accepter, parce que vous êtes le meilleur planteur, il paraît. Je vais accepter pour cette dernière fois.
Merci.
The cocoa has changed hands in the first of many deals. Now it's up to the government to get the best price it can by carefully choosing the right time to sell. Cocoa is vital to the economy. The Ivory Coast's capital and major port is Abidjan, the Manhattan of West Africa, a city built on cocoa. But its continuing prosperity depends on big cocoa harvests, high cocoa prices, and shrewd cocoa dealing. As the world's largest single producer, even a small shortage of Ivory Coast cocoa can upset the delicate balance of supply and demand and cause a large increase in the world prices in New York and London. One of the biggest international cocoa merchants is Rayner's, based in London. It acts as a middleman, buying from producing countries all over the world and selling to chocolate manufacturers.
Amsterdam and Hamburg. We've got the 800 tons of cams coming. We've got all the Bahias coming. We've got the Ivory Coast Agboville coming. Continaf have got some Gabon, Santa Mays and stuff coming.
This is the list up to now, right? So I'll keep this.
We've got those. We've got 800.
Derek Chambers runs the cocoa desk at Rayner's. He must continually match his cocoa sales with new purchases. At the moment, he's short 10,000 tons.
I don't want to get in the realms of Jamaicans, Grenadiers, etc.
No?
Because they're fiddly. They're 15 tons, aren't they?
Look, we've got to make 10,000 tons.
You've got to make 6 first, then 4. Okay? 6 first. The 4,
I'll take your point.
I've got 4,000 or 5,000 tons in London. Okay? But 6 first, but
So
as
you want it
easy
no
as
better
possible.
and the roof are all small companies.
No, but please get bloody started.
But it's not just the current crop that concerns him. He has to plan a year ahead. If the 1984 harvest is also bad, prices could soar.
I can understand the fear in people's hearts, and possibly the industry have lost the battle until they get a really good next temporale and the mid-crops start well in Africa. But for the short term, I suppose it's attrition.
Good intelligence gathering could give Rayners the edge in the cocoa market. Jan Fongers is a pod counter. His job is to predict the size of the Ivory Coast's next crop for Rayners. He travels around hundreds of plantations, revisiting exactly the same trees on each plot. By comparing the number of flowers and small pods with previous years, he may be able to judge the final crop size, but it's still too early to tell. He's been building up his sample for the last 2 years. This year, he must get it right. Rayners depends on his information when advising chocolate companies. One of its main customers is Roundtree Mackintosh, one of the world's top 4 chocolate companies. Each week it produces 29 million Kit Kats from its main factory in York, England. Cocoa is one of its largest outlays. 10 years ago, in a disastrous series of speculative deals, it lost over $60 million. Roundtree has had a cautious buying strategy ever since. Its chief cocoa buyer is Charles Ireland.
Morning, Frank. Have you heard anything recently from Jan Fongers?
His top priority is to keep the factory supplied with cocoa, so he always buys in the future.
I'm in the position where I've got to look whether or not to buy something or wait a while. I'm perhaps inclined to take on a little bit of cover. What's his recent count giving?
It's February 1983, and Charles Ireland is faced with rising cocoa prices after a 5-year fall. In January, the bad harvest had already pushed the price up by 150 pounds. By February, it was over 1,400 pounds. As the price wavered, Charles Ireland hoped it might drop. It did, briefly. Fearing another harvest might force prices even higher, he decided to buy at $1,280 for delivery in a year's time. If he's wrong, and it's only a temporary rise, he could be paying much more for his raw material than his competitors. Across the Atlantic, someone else has been taking a keen interest in cocoa for the first time in his life. Marty Kenner is a commodity speculator.
Listen.
He makes his living selling anything from Deutschmarks to frozen orange juice. All he needs is a small rented room, a computer, and a couple of telephones.
Different speculators have different styles. A lot of speculators are technically oriented, meaning they look at charts. So for those speculators, it doesn't matter whether it's pork bellies or it's bonds. For people like myself who describe themselves as fundamentalists, who look at the news and trade off of the news and the information, generally have specific areas of interest. But when you just pick up that the weather is going to be important and freaky, you can take a shot at something else.
That next shot was going to be cocoa. An article in a commodities magazine confirmed his view that the market was about to take off.
And you could do probably a few euro dollars. The whole market's going to suffer. And
his broker in New York is Scott Sumner of Conti Commodities. Kenner is one of his biggest private clients.
You have to pay the combined margins about $3,000, something like that. The point of doing it is to make money. It's the point of doing all this stuff. Hold on one sec. Hello?
In April, Sumner put in Kenner's order to the New York futures market. It was to be the first of many that spring. As a speculator, Kenner only has to put down a small deposit. He can then gamble many times his total assets, buying from producers and selling to manufacturers in the hope of big profits. Speculators rarely take delivery of the real cocoa. They only exchange paper promises, which keeps the market alive all year round. Kenner bought at $1,870. The price started rising after reports that few flowers were turning into pods. The drought continued in West Africa. Bushfires broke out, and crop forecasts were even lower. By the time Kenner sold, the price had risen nearly $500 a ton. He made nearly $100,000 on his cocoa, which at least cushioned him from heavy losses in his currency deals.
I liquidated my cocoa. I took my profits in my cocoa because I thought most of the move was over, and also because I misjudged the strength of the dollar, and I decided to stand aside for the while. So I took my losses on the currencies and took my profits in the cocoa, and basically deciding to go to the beach for a little while and sort things out.
While Kenner was on the beach, the price began to drop with news of good pod counts from the Ivory Coast. A rumor that some pods were not developing properly caused a brief rise, but then it was down again. Then a more serious rumor that the beans inside the pods were very small sent the price rocketing. The drought had affected the crop after all. By the end of December, the price was over $2,700 for the first time in 5 years. In 1983, more cocoa contracts were traded on the New York floor than in any previous year. The world's crop was bought and sold 7 times over. It was great for the speculators, but the exaggerated price changes made it difficult for the people who actually need cocoa, the chocolate manufacturers.
Morning, Frank.
By now, Charles Ireland is running out of cocoa, but he's hoping prices will fall.
We heard some new crop traded over the weekend. I believe the price was 2,200 French francs. Right. But that is 84, 85 crop, a long way away.
One is related to the other.
It's a good price for a producer,
Well,
but
it is.
for Roundtree Mackintosh, hardly the price that you will pay.
Yeah, and I did things without...
Anyway, Charles, for the moment, Roundtree is not in the
No, sorry,
marketplace.
just let me have my say.
Okay.
So Ireland has decided to risk waiting for lower prices.
It's my opinion that the price is exceedingly high because of the intervention of the speculative element. We need the speculators in the market for liquidity factors, but they do tend to get over-enthusiastic at times. They are interpreting all the information which is available at the moment in a manner which induces them to buy, so they are buying cocoa, buying cocoa, buying cocoa, and leaving the cocoa buyers on the sidelines.
But they've got a queue of lorries.
Rayners is in daily contact with Abidjan, passing on the latest information on the harvest to its customers.
Being delivered basically means that there's a bit of a hang-up for us in the bush. It's not going to come down as quickly as it should from the bush.
We're getting sparse information by way of production figures. We just don't know. It's going to be after Christmas, really, before we can begin to look at statistics and say, this market now is as high as it will go.
The anxiety over the outcome of the Ivory Coast crop is increasing. Conflicting rumors make it difficult to advise whether the current prices are justified.
Because we just don't have the room in Abidjan.
On January 11th, Derek Chambers set off to find out for himself. As Chambers arrives in Abidjan, 200 miles up country, the Ivory Coast cocoa czar is about to make headlines at a gathering in Ganyua. As Minister of Agriculture, Denis Bracquenon strictly controls the sale of all Ivory Coast cocoa. He tries to outwit the international cocoa market and keep the price high. His main ploy is to insist the crop will be poor. So today's speech is more for the benefit of the assembled media than for the people of Ganyua.
Alors, je vous demande, planteurs de Côte d'Ivoire, car le cacao c'est ici, est-ce que véritablement cette année, nous n'avons pas souffert la sécheresse, nous n'avons pas souffert le feu de brousse, et nos productions seront-elles ce qu'elles ont été l'année dernière? Non, nous devions répondre. Et c'est ça la vraie réponse. Je dis que, au jour où je parle, par rapport à l'année dernière, à la même date, nos entrées de cacao sont inférieures de plus de 100 000 tonnes par rapport à l'année dernière.
So he's estimating a crop of about 310,000 tons. A poor crop? Well, obviously not poor enough to stop him from rewarding the best planters for their excellent work. It's difficult to know whether he's pretending the crop's bad or whether he's guessing like everyone else.
Yes, and what did you see this morning or on your travels about the crop
development? Over here.
Derek Chambers must go home with more than just guesses. For the next few days, he'll be trailing Jan Fongers to check out his latest estimates. If Chambers reports back with higher figures than Braconneau, the cocoa price will fall. It's no wonder the Ivory Coast regards them as cocoa spies. Fonger's best estimate, 380,000 tons, give or take 10,000. By the middle of January, plenty of cocoa was arriving in Abidjan, but very little appears to be leaving the Ivory Coast. The rumors are that Braconneau is holding back to force the price higher. The cat-and-mouse game continues.
Right, now, coming to the figures as we've seen them in Abidjan seems to indicate that purchases are...
With Fonger's latest estimate, Reiners can now plan its strategy over the next few weeks.
Coming out. Given that Fongers was right initially, putting his crop between 370 and 380, we should be looking to buy that cocoa as and when it comes available through the shippers. Now the question...
What's Fongers's record about predicting crops over the last couple of years?
Very difficult to say. He has not been doing it maybe long enough to have a pedigree of the as a crop forecaster. This season, as far as I'm concerned, is very important for him. He should have now built up a reasonable sample to have got it right this year. So, you know, there is going to be availability of cocoa. It should dampen the enthusiasm for the bull market, and we should see a market where, for the first time in some while, the origins are participating and generally selling cocoa to the speculators, rather than just one speculator selling it to another speculator, etc., etc., as we go in a merry old paper chase up the market.
That morning in London, the paper chase starts slowly. The opening bids push March cocoa over 2,000 pounds again. When there are more sellers than buyers in a particular month, the price goes down. When there are more buyers, the price goes up. And that's what's starting to happen to March cocoa today. The futures markets don't just exist for people to speculate. Their main function is to protect cocoa merchants from sudden price changes by a process called hedging.
What's the price for March shipments today? Ivory Coast cocoa?
Derek Chambers is about to buy some real cocoa.
Now they're 1970 for 100.
Well, yeah.
But if the price drops before he's had time to sell it to a manufacturer, he'll lose money. So as soon as he's bought, he calls his trader on the futures floor to get him to sell the same number of paper contracts.
Would you sell 10 maize at 2,000 or better, please? Thank you very much. Okay, all right, that's all right. No, that's it. Thanks very much. Bye. Maize, train net 10. 4, 2 minute 10. Take 2.
So he sold 2 of the 10-ton lots and has 8 more to go. When Reiners finds a customer for the real cocoa, it will buy back the paper contracts. So by hedging its bets on the futures market, Reiners shifts the risk onto the speculators and insures itself against price falls. just before 11, and the London market is beginning to heat up. The price has risen £40 from last night's closing price. Limit up means trading will stop for 15 minutes while they sort themselves out. With the market so lively, Marty Kenner is thinking about getting back into cocoa. It's now 2:30 London time, and the New York market has just opened at $2,660. He's here to visit Conti Commodities' London office. He'll be seeking the advice of Giles Evans, Conti's cocoa expert.
Most of these other markets are so dead with Reagan's high interest rates really kind of killing everything. And cocoa's the real one shot. It's just the timing. It's done well in the past. I think cocoa's had a good run. I think it's pulled back some. What do you think about the timing, when to get back in this market?
I think well, February is a good time, but there's a setback that's come. The question is what price?
My own instinct is to buy a few lots here, and if it's a good deal at $2,600, it's a better deal at $2,500.
That's true, but you don't want to be buying at $2,600 when you could be buying at $2,500.
Yeah.
Why not buy $2,500 and then if it's a better deal again at $2,400?
This market has been so phenomenal for the last 6 months, and you're always chasing the price up.
That's because it's been the best market. The question is simply whether you can afford to take large losses, because it could go $400 lower before it turns around and goes back up. I think if you buy here, you'll make money in the end.
Robert, call Scott and let's buy some cocoa here, okay?
Hi, Marty. How you doing?
Talking to Giles, and I'm getting the feeling that we ought to buy a little right here.
Hello, New York.
Hello, New York.
How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
31265 and others.
Okay.
I want to buy 3 May cocoa at the market.
Okay, we'd like to buy 3 May cocoa market, $5.79.
$5.79. Thanks a lot.
Okay. That's what I did, Giles.
Well, I'm afraid I'm more cautious than that. Just because I simply think that you can get them low, but obviously we have to cater for the people who can't afford to run a position as far as you can, and maybe they'll just want to buy one lot at the cheapest they can, that kind of thing. But I do feel that it is going to come a little lower before going up again. And the timing, really, I think it should be in February would be a better time.
Hi, Merrick.
Hi.
Anything back on that cocoa still?
Yeah, bought 3 at $26.40.
3 at $26.40.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Kenner should have taken Evans' advice. In the next 3 days, the price fell over $100. He lost $3,000 and decided to sell.
I was just scared that when the new reports for the new crop would come in, it might be difficult to enter the market. So I was just taking a preliminary stab at that time to get in. I got stopped out, and the market really seems in a pretty strong downturn at the moment, and I'll just wait. And when the strength of that fall seems to arrest itself, I'll re-examine the situation. In part, getting back into cocoa depends on the fundamental information of what the story is on the next year's crop.
For the chocolate manufacturers, 1983 was an unpredictable year. At the start of 1984, the wild trading continued, with prices jumping up and down more than $70 in a single day. But eventually, the price for March cocoa stabilized at around $2,400.
In the cocoa purchasing area, we have had our difficulties. However, I believe that the measures we have taken have insulated us from the higher end of the price range, which may mean that the price increases which all chocolate manufacturers will be forced to make in the coming year may be less than they might otherwise have been.
By now, the final outcome of the Ivory Coast crop is looking clearer.
It certainly looks as though the crop will outturn in the Ivory Coast close to 370,000 tonnes, which is what Fongers was estimating. I suppose that could mean that he's still got a job for next year. It also means that the market has decline from the extremes reached in December and January to a level which we consider to be much fairer, between 1,700 and 1,800 pounds a ton.
But the Ivory Coast thinks it's far from fair. As the last of the cocoa trucks comes into port, Braconant is still claiming the final crop is 40,000 tons lower. Maybe the true figures will never be known. Perhaps it doesn't matter. What does matter is whom the world's cocoa traders believe, and they don't believe Braconant. So the price continues to fall.
Okay.
We're flat there.
We'll try again.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Marty Kenner made more than he lost in cocoa last year. He gets his kicks from winning and losing as a professional speculator, but he's worried that the addiction is becoming too widespread.
Everyone has become more and more of a speculator in some form or another because of what's going on in society at large, first with the wild inflation and then with the deregulation of the financial institutions. I mean, just knowing when to buy a house and when not to buy a house, or whether to put your money in a money market fund or a savings bank or whatever, the society has become more and more like a giant casino. How was school today, Max?
Good. Who won or lost today?
Who won or lost?
Yeah.
Well, I was lucky. I won today, thanks.
How much money?
Well, I don't know, Max, but we won.
I'm Eric Severide. In business, everything is uncertain, even the life of a chocolate bar. It may look solid enough, but we've just seen it's also the product of rumors and guesswork. The most controversial figure in all this is probably the speculator. He's been maligned for centuries, but his role is actually more complicated and benign than most people realize. When a producer of a commodity needs to sell, he doesn't have to wait for the manufacturer to buy. He can always sell to a speculator. And when a manufacturer needs to buy, he doesn't have to wait for the producer to sell. Because a speculator is willing to play both sides of the market and gamble on the future, he assumes much of the risk of an inherently risky business. The most unstable part of the process is a speculator's bank account. As Hollywood mogul Sam Goldwyn is supposed to have said, forecasts are dangerous, especially those about the future.
This program was a co-production of WGBH Boston and BBC London, which are solely responsible for its content. Enterprise is made possible by grants from public television stations. The Dun & Bradstreet Corporation, providing business and information services worldwide. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, a breed apart. Charles E. Culpeper Foundation, and the Gates Foundation.